Hello, everyone. Hi, and welcome to the Alliance of Independent Authors self-publishing podcast, self-publishing advice podcast. Today, we're talking about fiction and non-fiction, and I am here with the wonderful Sacha Black. Hi, Sacha.
Hello.
So this show is, as you regular listeners will know, is sponsored by Isart Inc. And their slogan is self-publishing where it doesn't feel like you're doing everything yourself. In other words, they will help you and hold your hand and bring you through the process. And that's very fitting because what we're talking about tonight is help and when to hire help. How do you know when you need it, and what kind of help do you need? Because I think maybe knowing that you need it is one thing, but knowing the kind of help that you need is what we're really going to be deep diving into here this evening. So Sacha, you're kind of in the middle of this, right?
I am. So I have brought on, I had an accountant last year, so that was the very first sort of external person, other than a designer and an editor who I worked with. This was somebody who I would have an ongoing relationship with. But in the last month, I've had to bring on a VA as well. So I'm now working with a VA. And so like my whole business is going through a bit of an upgrade. And so I have had to suck it up and ask for help, which I think for a lot of indie authors, not all, there's probably two schools of indie authors, but there's indie authors who will willingly ask for help. And, I wish I was them, but I'm a bit too much of a control freak and I don't really like letting go of things. And, being an indie author fosters that, it really, because we have to do everything ourselves. We build everything from the start by ourselves. So it was really hard for me to both admit that I needed help and then actually ask for help. So if there are people out there listening to this who are in that camp, I feel your pain.
That's great, because really I think coming to the point where you need help is actually something to be proud of. It actually means there's things going on, there's activity happening, there are people who are, your business is working, you're busy, you've got more work maybe or more opportunities and you can reach out. So it is actually something probably to kind of feel good about. And what we're going to try and do, because this is actually a huge topic and could go in 1,000 different directions. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to talk, break down the different kinds of help that you might need as an indie author, and wearing the three hats that we have to wear. So I think we're all very conscious of ourselves as makers, people who make books first in the writing phase, which is a making phase, but also then in the producing of an actual book. So that's what we tend to think of as our job. But actually, there are two equally important dimensions to the job. And we have spoken about these before and no doubt will again. And there's a whole Facebook group, if any of you are interested, Facebook group called Go Creative in Business, which uses these three headings all the time to set goals and set intentions and recognize accomplishments. But number one is the maker. Number two is the manager, the person who looks after the process in your business, and your profits. So how you're doing things is in the hands of the manager. And then the marketer, the marketeer, the person who gets the sales, who goes out there. No point in making a fabulous book and having wonderful processes that produce lots of books if nobody knows about them, and if you don't actually succeed in getting money for them. So if you don't do that, you're simply not in business. So the marketeer is the person who kind of goes out there. And the way I think about it is the maker works in the business, the manager works on the business, and the marketeer grows the business. And so
I like that.
Do you like that?
Yeah, I do. I really like that. Say that again, just in case people missed it, because I think that's a really, really good way of describing it.
Okay, so the maker works in the business, making what needs to be made in order to be sold. The manager works on the business and then actually kind of protects the maker and the marketeer so they can do their job by having clean processes that are actually profitable, as opposed to doing lots of things that aren't. And then the marketeer grows the business. It's their job to get out there and shout about it and tell people what's going on so that people have the opportunity to actually buy. So yeah. So we are going to break it down in that way, I think, as we look
Yeah.
at the possible help. Before we kind of dive into those three hats that people have to wear and what help each of them might require, is there anything else we want to say as a kind of an introduction?
I don't think so.
Let us leap right on in then. So I think when we're thinking about help, we possibly instantly think about people, but tech and tools can be incredibly helpful also. And so we are going to include tech and tools here in terms of thinking about what we might need help with. So yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and on that note, we recently had a self-publishing advice conference, which was all about tools and tech. So if you are listening and watching and you are an Ally member, then you can log into the Alliance of Independent Authors.org website.
Yes, .org. We are a non-profit.org.
Yeah, into the member website, and you can navigate to advice conference and get all of the login details. And if you're not a member, then you can purchase a 6-month or lifetime access pass by visiting just type into Google self-publishing advice conference and you will find all about it. And there are stacks of tools and amazing presentations and speakers in the last conference all about the tools and tech that can help you in your business.
Yeah, it really was an eye-opener. And I think, those of us who kind of do this all the time, we were surprised at how many tools we came across that we hadn't heard of before. So yeah, good catch. And it's worth saying for those who are not Ally members that there will be a sale coming up around Black Friday time. So keep an eye out for that. Okay, so let's talk about writing. Let's begin maybe with those, the technology and the tools. Do you have things that help you to write faster, write better?
Yeah, so I use Scrivener. I think a lot of people probably use Scrivener, but I draft in Scrivener and then I edit in Word just because when I draft, I write all over the place and out of order. So Scrivener helps because it has the functionality to separate scenes or chapters. So that helps me to draft, and then I chuck it into Word. And then I also use software like Pro Writing Aid to help do an edit proof type edit before I send it off to an editor. What about you?
Yes, I think everything you've mentioned so far. I've also investigated Plotter, which is really good novel plotting software, plotting and planning. It just does that. It doesn't do anything else, and it does it really well. And I think this is the development that we're seeing in the indie author tools marketplace in the last couple of years, is these very specific tools for very specific parts of the process. Fictionary is another great one, which actually allows you to self-edit as you go. And before you hand your book over to a professional editor, it really guides the self-editing process.
Yeah, and that one focuses on like a developmental story edit rather than Pro Writing Aid, which focuses much more on the line work. So yeah, they actually both work together really, really well.
That's very true. And in fact, one of the sessions in the self-publishing advice conference that you were talking about is Pro Writing Aid and Fictionary together, talking about how to use their two platforms together. So yeah, they are really good tools. And then for writing, are there people who can help? Do we have to sweat every word out, through beads of blood coming out of our foreheads?
Yeah, you could. No, I mean, so it really depends whether, like, where you are at and what your goals are. So of course you could work with a co-writer and a collaborator to co-write something together, and then there are many different ways to work that process, but obviously you're going to do less of the work, and it's going to be more of a collaboration. Then and in the same vein, you have ghostwriters as well, who would write on your behalf, usually with guidance, sometimes in the style of your voice, unless it's sort of your first book and you are not publishing necessarily in your own voice, or they will write they're very good at what's the word? Ghostwriting. So embodying whatever tone, whatever style, whatever cadence you want them to create for you. And then critique partners or beta readers is probably another one. So I mean, they're more or less one and the same. People will argue the toss over the difference between them, but typically I see a critique partner as somebody who is a writer and will look at your work, give you feedback on it before you will then do another edit based on their feedback, and then it will go to an editor. And then beta readers tend to be readers, but I don't know if that's just my definition or whether it's an accepted definition, but lots of people like to argue about those two. I don't know if you...
I think that's a pretty good breakdown of the two. And then you can get tools to kind of meet people, because one of the tools again in Self-Pub.com was beta books. And they actually provide a platform now, because beta readers are so widely used in the community. They provide a platform for actually managing that whole process of getting your book to beta readers and getting them back on time and making sure they tackle what they should, and managing the whole flow of that. So yes, a nice tool as well. So yeah, and I think when it comes to ghostwriting and things like that, you really do need to think about you and your business and why you're doing it. I mean, for some writers, the idea of getting a ghostwriter is just like completely and utterly, why would I do that? I'm here because the whole thing I want to do is write. For somebody else, it might be, you actually, what you want to do, what's most important to you is a business, and you can see, I ain't going to get enough books written between now and whenever to have a business, so I need to get somebody else in kind of help that. And you said something very interesting before we came on the air, and I'm not sure if it refers only to writing or to all the different aspects, but you said that you feel non-fiction authors are more likely to hire help and need it sooner, or something like that?
I think non-fiction authors are more likely to need help sooner, purely because the tendency is for them to have multiple streams of income, which means the amount of admin in their businesses is probably tenfold. Where people, if you have a fiction author who's writing in 4 different genres, they're probably going to need, help very quickly as well. But for, I guess, the what you would class as normal indie author who's writing in one genre, compared to a non-fiction author who's likely to have some kind of business around their book, I think a non-fiction author will probably require help sooner. Just for all of those reasons. They have multiple streams. They are so often running a business as well. Sometimes their book is a business card rather than being an author as their predominant field. So yeah.
So complexity of business and ultimate aims and goals, and these are the things that you need to think about. So I think it's also worth saying that before you hire help, maybe make sure that you have simplified your business and that you're not carrying a lot of deadwood, where you go off and you hire somebody who's going to help you to do things that ultimately won't be that profitable or that pleasurable, that you won't get the benefit from them. So you do need to be very clear before you hire. And it can be a great way of concentrating the mind, because when it comes to actually paying somebody to do something rather than doing it yourself, you may well find actually it's not worth it to me. And if it isn't worth it to get somebody else to do it, then why on earth are you doing it?
I have just been through that, so I can,
Okay.
I can 100% vouch for that. The minute I had to hand over cash, I was like, wait a minute, should I be doing this? I don't enjoy doing this, but before you make decisions, I think there's a couple of things you have to do. The first thing you have to do is assess, is it a pain point for you? And is that why you want help? I needed help because I was in pain. I wasn't enjoying some of the things that I was doing, but they were making money, and therefore I couldn't not do them. You need to assess, you need to look at some kind of data or metric or statistics to show you whether or not the thing that you are asking somebody else to do is having some kind of beneficial outcome. Is it bringing you referrals or clicks? Is it making sales? Is it a social media scheduling? And so, for example, one of the things that I was doing was tweeting out loads of blog posts, based on my podcast. But actually, when I looked at the statistics, I was getting a lot more refers from Facebook and Pinterest than I was Twitter. So actually, why bother doing it? I'm not going to pay anybody to do that. And Twitter is one of the ones that takes the longest for me to format. So I've just stopped doing it because it's not having any impact.
Perfect.
Yeah, really, definitely that's what happens.
Sweet. Very good. Okay, so when we move on then from writing into the publishing arena, I think this is where people do hire help, and hopefully are more inclined to. I hope every Ally member now realizes that we need an editor, and to hire somebody, after the self-editing process, to get a professional editor as soon as you can, and the best one that you can afford. Designers, formatters, these, what you might call the production part of, just making a great book. And Ally, of course, has a directory of approved services that you can look at and be sure that you're able to assemble the perfect kind of team to put the book together. Because while we call it self-publishing, it doesn't mean that you do or can do absolutely every aspect of it yourself. And I think, Sacha, even the most DIY person is going to find areas that are not their skill set, and wasting time trying to do something that you're never going to be that good at. You really have to think about, how much your time is worth. So I think let's move on then to the processing, the actual management stuff. Jules, in a comment here, zooming in from Scotland, hi Jules, is talking about collaboration, multi-author platforms where you can get together to do things. And I think, are you particularly talking about marketing? But I think perhaps also we can help each other when it comes to those things like formatting, design, editorial. Other authors may be skilled editors, for example, or maybe skilled designers, and you can perhaps get together into a collaborative group so that you can actually manage the full production of a book between you by swapping skills if money is just not possible. The irony of this business is when you most need the money at the beginning, when you most need the help at the beginning, is when you have the least money. So you have to balance the needs out there in some way.
Absolutely. No, yeah, I completely agree.
So management then, processing and profits. Let's start with profits, shall we?
Yeah, so I think the most obvious place you're going to need help is with your accounts. I know, and obviously in each different country, there will be different tax laws, different sets of requirements. And I and Ally always advise that you seek out professional accountancy help when it comes to your books if you are unsure. But there are many different things. So once you've got your business or separate bank account set up for your income and your business, you will then need some kind of bookkeeping system. Once you get, a couple of books or a few different streams of income, it is much easier to do that bookkeeping on a monthly basis than it is to leave it until the end of the year, which I did the first time. And it saves you a very big headache. So there are lots of bookkeeping bits of software like Xero, for example, Sage. There's various different ones. Xero, which is spelled Xero, is my favorite. That's the one that I use, and it's so intuitive. So I always recommend that. And then, of course, you can have a bookkeeper. You can hire help. They can go in. You can give like account permissions for them to do your bookkeeping on your behalf if that's something that you don't want to spend your time doing. And then at year end, if you're not an accountant or you don't know how to do your books, then you're probably going to need an accountant, which is separate to your bookkeeper.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say that if I had to do my own bookkeeping, I would never have been able to do any of this because I simply cannot do it. I don't have those skills at any level. I'm just number blind. So at the beginning, I think as authors, we don't want to invest in our business, generally speaking. And I think it is worth thinking about way up front what you do want to invest in. And again, that idea of valuing your own time and how much time, how much your time is worth, because you can be spending time doing things that you could easily, use to bring in more income, which has a higher value and is scalable over time. And you might need to buy yourself a bit of time at the beginning. You might actually need to take some sort of, I often compare us to somebody starting a restaurant or, almost any other business is going to have to invest some money up front, and in some cases a really sizable amount of money up front.
Yeah.
And it can be very helpful at the beginning to think about and so few authors do this, but and in fact, the more authorial you are and the more into writing you are, probably the less likely you are to think about it this way. But it is really helpful for you to take a step back and think about your production as a business, and to think about, if I had to present that to a bank manager and get a loan based on this business, does it add up? Does it make sense? Most writing businesses do. Sorry, over to you.
No, I was just going to agree with you. That was actually the question. Somebody said to me, do you actually know, do you know how much it's going to cost you to hire somebody per hour? And do you know roughly, what you're earning per hour? And I hadn't actually done the math. And it wasn't until I did the math that I was like, oh, yeah, like it's really not beneficial for me doing half of the things that I'm doing, that I could pay somebody, less than my hourly earning, essentially, to do. So, yeah. And I think so many of us just assume we can't afford it because, you don't always have to hire somebody in the same country as you. You can hire somebody in a different country where the cost of living is lower. There are always ways and means of getting help on your budget. You just have to be clever and spend a little bit of time looking or asking for recommendations.
Absolutely. And again, there is the Ally directory and the searchable database in the member zone. There are also really good marketplaces where you can hire help. Readsy is obviously a fantastic place, not just for editors. People tend to think of it for editors, but for lots of the other things that you might need in terms of production, particularly. There's Upwork, which I use when I want to hire somebody to do a discrete job, that isn't part of the team kind of ongoing. I use Upwork, but there's Fiverr as well, and lots of these marketplaces where you can actually get the kind of help that we tend to need at a very reasonable price.
Absolutely.
So do think about doing that.
So I think it's time to talk about the elephant in the room. And I didn't mention this to you before we started, but for me, the whole elephant in the room for this conversation is about process, because I think if you as indie authors are anything like me, you just made stuff up as you went along, and you created random processes that may not have been efficient, they may not have been the best way, but they worked for you and you didn't have time to make them fantastic. And so you got to the point where everything was a bit of a kerfuffle and a mess, but it worked because you knew how to do everything. The problem is when you then bring on help, you have to be able to explain your process to somebody else, and that's where the most important aspect of bringing on help is clarifying your processes. And I have had to go through a whale of a time being able to hand over stuff. So if I talk about some of the things, and maybe you can add a few things in, I had to create a file structure, like a file naming structure, because I just stuffed stuff in that folder, and then I stuffed other things in that folder over there, and only me knew where anything was. So yes, you need a very clear file, even a file naming structure, so that if whoever's working with you has to add files in, they know how to label and name files so that you can then find them independently of each other. You need some kind of communication system. You need to work out how you are going to communicate with each other, be it WhatsApp or Messenger or Slack or whatever. And then you need like a storage. So I've sort of talked about file structure, but you need a mutually, what's the word, where you can both access a storage. So for example, I have a VA helping with my podcast now, and we're putting all the files into Google Drive because both of us can access it. You also need to think about your passwords and protecting your passwords. So LastPass is something that I'm using, and I put my passwords in and they have the ability to copy the password, but without seeing the wording. So that's another mechanism you've got to think about, like your security and those kinds of things. And I'm just trying to think, you also need to be able to communicate instructions and step-by-step processes. So what I did, because I just could not get it onto paper, was I did a video and I walked through every step of the way through my, scheduling a podcast and uploading and all of that stuff. And that's how I was able to communicate. And we've changed and edited and updated processes. And that's one of the things that I think you need to be cognizant of, is that you may have to change some of your processes in order to accommodate both something that works for you and something that works for the person that you are working with.
And in my experience, a lot of authors can find that quite a frustrating period. But it is actually, if you can understand how much it is improving your own processes to have to do it that way, because if they're not making full sense to somebody else, chances are you're wasting time searching for files that you can't find, or doing things in a long roundabout way that you don't necessarily need to do. Or you also find, as you do up a process document for a virtual assistant, you find, oh gosh, I've got 4 steps there, I actually only need 2. Because that's just the nature of when it grows up organically. It just is a bit messy, and it just needs a bit of tidying up. The other thing I found back when I started hiring was that I then looked at my own writing and publishing process, and how, just the steps between idea, notes, how I hold notes and things on different books and different genre, and how it turns from notes into text, and how it goes on through the editing process and design and so on. Just making that process as smooth as possible. And I think a lot comes together when you begin to get a bit of a team who get you, be it one person or more, who actually understand your way of doing it, and who know how, they know the way you think, and they can bring their strengths to balance out your weaknesses. And I think this is one big important tip, is don't hire people who have the same strengths and weaknesses as you. Hire people who have different strengths. And I think that's really, really key.
Got a couple of questions.
Yeah, do you want to have a look?
Yeah, so Vicky says, I'm in the US, so this may not be applicable in other countries, but my file system for financial stuff, receipts, invoices, bills, statements, is based on my federal tax return. Each line on Schedule C is a separate category with multiple file folders within each. Other files, research, marketing, etc., are color-coded so I can find them easily.
I think that's great. And I think it would apply no matter what country you're in. Look and see how your particular tax people work out the expenses that you're allowed and so on, and follow their method, because that makes it all so much easier at the end, rather than you having different terms for, say, marketing expenses than they have, or whatever it might be, or dividing things up in different ways. Great tip,
exactly it.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think also it is a really good tip, just to reiterate that point. Whenever I bring on something new or do something new in my accountancy software, I always refer to my accountant and say, how would you like me to categorize this? So like, for example, when I started paying a contractor or a freelancer, I'd never done that before, so I didn't know how to attribute it. So yeah, and that just means at the end of the year, there's no confusion about what anything means. Jules Horn says, did you find a VA who already had processes you could tap into? I'm guessing that's directed at me. So I found a VA via a recommendation from a friend who had a VA already working for them, and they are also an author. So they knew a lot of the things that I would be asking them anyway. And so I trusted that recommendation because I trusted the person. And they have skills that I do not. They are frighteningly efficient when it comes to administration and detail and consistency. And I'm none of those things.
You're not so bad, I would say. Having worked with you, I've seen a hell of a lot worse. But
yeah,
including myself. She laughs, hollow laughter from Sacha. But I think, author VA is a growing job category. Lots of people are getting into this because 10 years ago, it just didn't exist. You had a handful of best-selling authors who ever would even think about hiring assistants. Now it's becoming so much more common, and it does help if you have somebody who understands what it is to be an indie author and some of the needs and things, especially when it comes to the third category that we're going to be looking at, which is the marketeer category. Somebody who has social media experience may not understand what it is for an author to do social media, because it is quite different. There's to just take an exaggerated possibility, but in a lot of businesses, social media is very pushy and can be quite out there and brash, even crass in some cases. That will not work mostly with readers who don't tend to like that sort of approach. They just move off it. So in terms of the kind of the subtle, soft stuff that's hard to communicate, and that's also so embedded in you that you may not even know how to give that instruction. It may be just so inherent to how you do things that you're not even conscious of it. I think it can really help if you get somebody who has experience, but it isn't necessary. One of the people that I work really, really close with hadn't any experience working with authors until she worked with me, and it's she's absolutely fantastic. So it isn't necessary, but I think to answer Julie's question, that it certainly can help.
So I think there's just one other point we should probably make, and which is, with the exception of cover design and editing, I think it's important that we as authors and business owners know how to do the task we're about to ask somebody else to do, because there's a tendency that when we don't want to do something because we don't know how to do it, or we don't like doing it, before we've really mastered that action, we'll just pay and just throw money at the problem and get somebody else to deal with it. The problem with that is you are then not able to know whether or not they're doing a good job, and you're then not able to help them if they go wrong or they've broken something. So I think it's always really important, especially because we are empowered indie authors, to know how we need to do something before we then pay somebody else to do it for us, with the exception of those two I mentioned at the start.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely key. And the more you know about also editing and design, you can feed in, but you won't have the hands-on experience of those. I find this problem is worst with marketing. There is a sort of a fantasy that goes around that authors have, especially when they start out, that they can give the marketing to somebody else, and somebody else is going to be able to. And it's probably the aspect of the work after the writing that they really cannot hand over. You've got to be part of the process that actually works out who your ideal reader is, who are your comparable authors. All of that is something you have to be very involved in. And a lot of the time, authors are still thinking about traditional ways of marketing, rather than the kinds of ways that actually sell books for indie authors. So just to talk a little bit about some of the tasks that are very handoverable, if that's a word, in the marketeer zone, the book, the person who's growing the business and out there kind of shouting about it, the book promotion and marketing. So obviously launching a book, you can get a lot of the actual administration, a lot of the work there, while you will have to craft probably the descriptions and the creative that goes into your launch materials. a lot of it after that is really quite administrative and can be handed over quite easily. And it really helps. It keeps your energy for actually launching the book and talking about the book. So, setting up podcasts, blog tours, any of that kind of thing, your email marketing, while you might write the actual content, and same with your social media, you can get help with the actual setting up of it. Everything can be pre-scheduled now. It doesn't all have to be done at the time. You can, plan it out well in advance. Advertising, similarly, you will be involved in the creative and the making of your social media posts and ads is part of the maker, but the actual getting them out there and making sure they're reaching the right people, that's the marketeer who has to do that. SEO, search engine optimization, which we don't have time to explain what that is, but look it up. It's very important in terms of making sure that your book is found, or at least that you've done your best to enable it to be found by somebody who wants to discover a book like that. These things are best handed over, especially if you don't fully understand what you're doing. You can get some help with it once you understand the principles of what you're doing. The categories, the keywords, the kind of reader you want to read, the comparable authors that you have, but they can actually then help you to set up the structure, prizes and giveaways also. Anything else on the marketeer end? That's about it, I think.
No, I don't think so. Yep.
They're pretty much the major ones. So, yeah, and I think the final thing to say is, in terms of help, working with somebody consistently is a lot better for you and for them, and creating a relationship over time. Getting somebody new all the time is quite wearing, because you have to keep training people in. It takes a long time sometimes to explain all that soft stuff that we were talking about. So, the way to make sure that happens is be decent, be caring, a kind of person to work with, be fair, pay your bills on time, pay quickly. A lot of people who will be helping you will be relying on that money. They're not big corporations who can have a 30 or 60 or 90-day waiting period. Pay as quickly as you can. See the time that you're putting into your assistance as an investment, and take your time. Take care to actually communicate well, slow down, probably things that you can kind of bang out yourself. You need to just take a step back, take a breath, make sure you fully understand before you commission them. Try to not muddle people up, and just generally being respectful of their time and their skills and their energy, as well as your own. Any other tips on working with people?
I don't think so.
No. Okay. So, yeah, that's it, folks. I just will read Jules' comment here, the final one, because I think she's saying some really sound and interesting things. It takes so long to learn everything yourself, 2 to 3 years to get your head around processes, ads, SEO, etc., which I agree it's necessary to understand. So for me, it's taken that time to get to the point where scale becomes possible. Wondering how you find balance between this and the writing, which for me has taken a back seat. It's like a uni-length education, I think. I think a uni-length education is a brilliant way to think about it. I mean, it's one of the most ambitious jobs you could aspire to in this world, because it's got 3 huge skills behind it: the writing, the publishing, the business. You need to get good at all of those. How I balance, I'll ask Sacha how she balances in a minute, but how I balance is by putting the writing first. So I try to write first every day. Don't open the email, don't look at the phone, don't do anything. Just get up, do my little morning ritual, which is all kind of nicey nice, and then go straight into writing and stay there and stay with the writing. And I know when I walk away from the writing, which is, I get up at kind of ridiculous o'clock, so I can do all that, because then the day takes over and there's always something that I haven't planned for, always something unexpected coming in the door, but at least the writing is done for the day, and then I'm happy doing everything else. If I don't get the writing done, then I'm constantly thinking, I wish I was writing. So that's how I do it. What about you? Are you a morning person, an evening writer? Or?
I was thinking more along the lines of like gin and chocolate for balancing. No, okay, not relevant. Okay, let me try again. So badly is how I manage. No, okay, wait. Let me start again. If I'm honest, I think the way my brain works is that I take one project at a time, and so I guess batching is probably how I work. So I wrote 20,000 words in like 10 days, and then now I just, you know, I expunged everything from my brain, and now I need a break. I can't write, you know, for another 2 weeks. So now I'm working on website upgrades and, you know, managing my inbox and advertising and stuff like that. So for me, it's like, if I'm doing creative work, everything else falls away, and that is all I can do. So I tend to batch now. Either I'm doing creative work or I'm doing managing, businessing, marketing, that side. And that's, you know, and then there's a few things that I do every week, but for the broad, what are words? Orna, I'm struggling now.
No, but I think it's interesting. We've given two completely different approaches, and they both get the words out. And really, it's about experimenting for yourself, because sometimes the way you think it's best for you may not necessarily be. So, you know, either way works, and there are other ways to do it too. And the thing is, I think, to make absolutely core and central is that the writing doesn't suffer, because what's 100% sure is that the call of the outer world is bigger and louder than the inner call to write. And it can be too easy to find, oh my God, 3 months have gone by and I haven't really written anything. And so quarterly planning is another big, important part of how I do things. I have an intention for the quarter, in under each, you know, maker, manager, marketeer, and, you know, every week I'm working on another little chunk of that intention, if you have that quarterly intention, if you like. Some weeks go well, some weeks don't, but there's enough time over a quarter to, you know, flag a bit and then catch up, or get ahead of yourself and then have a rest, or whatever. And that's really important to me, that I do kind of in my calendar see it, that it's balanced out, and that I have allocated the, you know, a balanced amount of time to each of these aspects, because it's very easy for it to fall away.
I've been finding more and more I'm going in an intuitive cycle. So I have, like, I've noticed I need an input phase and then an output phase. And I very much get a particular feeling or sensation when I've output as many words as I can. It doesn't mean that I don't know how the rest of the book's going to go. Just means that I haven't input enough, you know, inspiration, books, TV, whatever, visits to museums or whatever. I haven't had enough of that in order to then go again. It's like I'm like a battery. Basically, I use all my inspiration energy and then I have to refill. I tend to go in 6-week cycles, but sometimes, like at the moment, I had a very hard sort of 2-week binge of writing, and so now I'm like empty and doing menial website updates instead.
Yeah. So the point is, folks, it's never perfect. It's always a bit messy. Everything we talked about today is about recognizing that you do muddle through to some extent, and sometimes you can find people who will hold your hand and help you to muddle through a little bit better. So hope that some of those tips were useful to you. The way December falls and the way Christmas and holidays fall this year, we won't have a fiction and non-fiction podcast next month, December. We'll be back in January with a new theme and perhaps a new way of doing this. But until then, happy writing and happy publishing. And we're here as always for your email and on the Facebook forum if you have any questions or any follow-up that you want to do. The podcast will be out on the blog on Friday, and that will have the transcript, show notes, and any links to anything that we've mentioned here today. So yeah, just bye-bye, really. Bye-bye from me and bye-bye from her.